Well, thank you, Idrissa. The White House is pushing for a re-engagement with Africa on a lot of fronts. Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently visited the continent, followed by U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. To help us understand what this all means, let's go to Frannie Leautier, Senior Partner and CEO of Southbridge Investments, who is visiting Washington from Kinshasa. And if I mispronounce your name, please correct me. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you very much. You pronounce it perfectly. It's a great pleasure.
All right. So let's look at all these trips that have taken place recently. How are they being viewed on the continent especially?
Well, first of all, I think it's the level of who has come and who has come. If you start with the level, I think it's the first time that a series of high-level U.S. officials have come to Africa in quite a while, and that has been noticed, and people have been commenting about it. But also when you look at who has come, let me start first with Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, because she is the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. That shows the significance of the global issues that the United States wants to address with Africa. They go all the way from fragile states and conflict. You just had this segment with the visit of the Pope and the discussion you had with the European Union delegation for the Sahel. So critically, the fragile states and the ability for them to actually deliver on climate objectives, because those tend to also be the very difficult zones, the arid zones in the Sahel, the importance of food security in those areas, and then, of course, the importance of stability in general for economic development. Mm-hmm. And that brings me to then Secretary Yellen, because she represents the financial sector and the economic policy world, both macroeconomic policy, but also global policy on global public goods. So that has also been a very strong observation that this is an important area for Africa's economic development, but maybe also for the role that Africa can play globally to support the rest of the world, jointly working with the United States and other partners on climate risks, on risks around food security, and then, of course, on the very challenging issues of the energy transition. And then Secretary Blinken, because of the importance of diplomacy.
Yeah, now, you know, some people we speak to on the continent say when they look around, they see so much evidence of the presence of China, for instance. They see roads, they see bridges, they see all sorts of forms of infrastructure. The question is, how different and unique is the U.S. strategy? If you look at, for example, the officials who have just visited, how does it differ from that of China?
I think, first of all, something struck me in the words that are being used, and then, of course, we'll look at the actions. So for the words, I was my ears were wide open listening to two words in particular, that the U.S. is focused on Africa, and the U.S. is focused with Africa, and the U.S. is looking to work together with Africa. And I think this is quite different from previous engagements, which were really, I'll do this for you and you can do this for me, so let's exchange. And that togetherness and kind of common future, I think, makes a big difference going forward, because it looks like the push is for Africa as a partner for the future to address the challenges that the world is facing in the future, which would then be mutually beneficial for Africa and for the United States. The second one is, I think, the sectors of focus. And I was struck also by where the speeches were made. And Secretary Yellen went to talk to a center that represents women and youth entrepreneurs. So that's the backbone of Africa's economy, the small and medium enterprises, women and young people who have previously been excluded from the economy, but now are coming back in with great creative ideas. And it leads then to the third key piece, which is innovation, because the young creative minds in Africa can work very, very strongly with creative minds in the United States to develop new technologies and to exploit new technologies, whether it's in energy and energy transition, the clean transport solutions, or areas relating to measuring and tracking using satellite data and other areas, for instance, if you want to see carbon sequestration in the forests of Africa and so on.
And you know, it's interesting when you talk about engagement, mostly when you look at the youth of Africa today with technology, they're becoming very plugged into the global trends, and so many of them have even come to Washington, for instance, to present some of their startups. Has the strategy in terms of, from the African perspective, changed, where the continent is not just seen as a place that is waiting to receive, but rather to engage and also has something to offer? And is that coming out from at least the position of the leadership on the continent?
I think both from the leadership, but also from the young people themselves. When you walk around Africa, and almost in any country in Africa today, you would hear young people talking very optimistically about the future. Why? Because Africa is home to 60 to 70% of the rare earths that are needed for the low carbon transition, and therefore is already providing the raw material for that transition, but can also provide the solutions or the technology space if you can bring these creative ideas from the youth. And the startups that came to Washington during the US-Africa Summit are just one example of that. The second reason people are optimistic is that on the creative side of what young people do, there's also a very strong demand from the rest of the world, and particularly from the United States. There's a young woman from Kenya who started to make running shoes because Kenyans are very good runners. And it ended up that her biggest demand for those running shoes are from the United States. So she's now setting up a factory in the United States. You see the same thing in music, in fashion, in the food sector. We had this big conference on food security in Dakar that just ended with a large number of African heads of state. And Africa is leading the way in healthy eating because nuts, tubers, and grains are the basic food to get a healthy, long life. And Africa produces those in large quantities, so agricultural productivity can just boost that even more. So I think programs like Prosper Africa, thinking again of a future for trade between Africa and the United States, because AGOA is coming to an end. How do we bring all those together so that investment can accompany trade and support these young businesses in Africa that are so dynamic and creative to do even more?
Yeah. Now, you know, some see, when they see China's involvement, they see Russia, they feel like there is a contest here. But all these powers have said, no, we're not necessarily competing with each other. Each of us is engaging separately and differently. Can Africa engage with all this in the most beneficial way to the continent and in the most sustainable way? Or must one elbow out the others in order for the continent to have a more meaningful engagement?
I think things have changed quite a bit in terms of economic planning and prioritization across many countries in Africa. Today, there's strong leadership in the ministries of finance, in the development boards that many countries have created, for example, the Rwanda Development Board, and you see the same in Senegal, in Tanzania, and in other places where you have investment centers that welcome investors and have a strategic plan to engage investors. So I think Africa is prepared now to work with partners with different ideas and bringing different perspectives for the success of the future of the world and the future of Africa. So it's going to be really a question of who has the best to offer in terms of technology, in terms of partnership in investment and trade. And there I see clear areas of opportunity. So for example, new ideas in liquidity in the market, requires
and I know there's a lot we can discuss, but we will leave it right here. I want to thank you very much, Frannie, for your insight. Frannie Leautier is Senior Partner and CEO of Southbridge Investments. Well, and that's our show for today. Don't forget to visit our website, voaafrica.com, and also follow us on Twitter at VOA Straight Talk Africa. And that's it. Have a good day.